Welcome to today's webinar, Shadow IT, a silent enemy at the gates of data protection from privacy laws and business. I'm Helena Wotton, data lawyer and correspondent for PL&B. I'll be your chairperson for today's session. And today's session will focus on a live scenario as you live through a real live incident, one that could happen to you easily. Now, before I introduce our illustrious speaker, Giampiero Nanni, I want to say, if you have any questions, please put these into the Q&A function, which is available on the bottom of your screen through Zoom. I'm sure you're all familiar with how Zoom works now. And Stuart will collate these and put these to our speaker at the end of his presentation, unless, of course, there is anything that comes up during the presentation. And there's Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Giampiero Nanni, who is a cybersecurity and data protection expert with DP consultancy HewardMills. So Giampiero regularly advises his clients on privacy and cybersecurity matters. He has had a very illustrious career working for a UN agency, producing the cybersecurity and risk management policy for the 2020 G20 summit. At Symantec, Giampiero was in the government affairs EMEA team and was involved in a lot of internal privacy operations at the Global Privacy Office. He is an expert on GDPR, in particular the security requirements set out in GDPR, and he will talk about that today. He advises on the business value of privacy compliance, which is really important, I'm sure, to many of you in our audience. And he will walk through the ways that organizations can implement regulatory mandates through privacy and cybersecurity technological choices. His previous appointments, as you may have read, include Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, and Accenture, and he's a regular speaker and author of many publications and articles on regulatory compliance. So we're honoured to have you here today, Giampiero. Now, before I hand over to Giampiero, if either Giampiero or I disappear due to technical IT internet issues, please do be patient. We will reconnect as soon as we are able to continue with the presentation. So Giampiero, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I know you'll be talking for about 40 minutes. So do please, audience, ask any questions as we go, and Stuart will collate those. Giampiero.
Thank you very much, Helena, for the introduction, and hello, everybody. Around the world, I understand there is people, delegates from all over the world actually today. So very, very happy to hear that. Yes, so today I will discuss what could be a very realistic scenario. So it is a scenario, it's not something that really happened, I would say, yet, but it could happen. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what the kind of implications, something that looks like a very small IT issue, what kind of implications it can have in a much wider context, including obviously the privacy and GDPR and everything else that goes around, that goes together. So it's a plot. So it's a plot. I will not anticipate the plot, but I will anticipate the outcome. And the outcome is a catastrophic outcome with very severe consequences in a GDPR context, and then even more serious implications in a wider sense for the organization. We're going to see that. And there is one apparent culprit, or there are more, we will see. So this is a dramatization, as I say, so please allow something. I will talk about privacy, I will talk about security, but obviously, as I say, it's a scenario. So make a bit of allowance for that. Let's start. It's one of those mornings. So I would like you to imagine maybe yourself to be maybe the global privacy officer of a global company. Maybe, I don't know, in an insurance environment or anything else you think appropriate. So you're the global privacy officer and you are at home on a Friday. Catastrophes always happen on a Friday, as you know. And even before 8, you you have one problem. You think it's the worst problem you have in the day, which is you can't get those kids out to school because you have to go to the office. In reality, the worst thing you need that day is something else. It is a call from your CEO, who never really calls you. But that day he calls you and he asks, he doesn't even say good morning. He just says, what happened? And you have no idea what he's talking about. And then he tells you, he says, we are all over the place in the news because we have lost millions of customer and employee records. They are all over the internet. So I'm asking you, as a global privacy officer, what happened? And you have no idea. And he said, look, I'm going to be on national TV by 10 o'clock this morning. Please come to the office as soon as possible. And so you do that. So you, it was the fastest school drop-off of your life. And when you get to the office, it is absolute chaos and crisis. The first thing you notice actually is the display of the share value of your company with a big red minus sign and a 2-digit after that. I don't know, let's say 17% at 9:07 a.m. So things are not looking good at all. And when you walk into the office, what you find is, mayhem. Is everything is crumbling down, everybody's running around, the PR team are going crazy because their CEO is going on TV in an hour, and everybody has 3 big questions. And in ascending order of importance, number 1, what happened? Number 2, how much are we losing? And that display of the share price is really a nasty sight. And number 3, the most important question, who's to blame? Welcome to the corporate world. So that's what goes around at that moment. It is obviously a very complicated situation, and you have one only way of thinking about this. The only way, 12.7 million records leaked in the internet, you have been hacked by one of those nasty rogue state-sponsored groups that have that as a mission in life to destabilize the economy, destabilize the stock market, and bring disgrace to everybody in the world. So that's what you think. That there is no other explanation to something so huge and so masterfully, conceived. And as you have these thoughts, the time goes. It's Friday, remember. In reality, now you're going to Saturday immediately. It's been a long day. Goodbye weekend, and on Saturday afternoon there's a breakthrough, and the breakthrough comes from 2 teams: the customer care team and the HR team. And the 2 VPs come to your office and say, we have some clue here. We are told and we see that the records that have been leaked are actually exactly the same data in the customer care case management form and in the employee case management form. So whenever a customer has something, a complaint or anything else, or an employee, we use these forms. But the particularity of all this is the fact that these are PDF forms. But what we saw in the internet are records in an Excel, or looks like an Excel. So that's the clue, but we don't understand what really happened. So you start calling in some of these people from the customer care and HR team, and then there is the breakthrough. Then you understand. What happens is this. Employees need to do, and this is the key point of the whole situation, employees need to do some calculations in those PDF files. But you can't do a calculation on a PDF file. So what you have to do is to either copy that into an Excel spreadsheet, or you use something different, which is you convert those files from the PDF into an Excel. How do you do that? Well, very simple. You go to the internet, you go to Google or to any other search engine you like, and you type PDF conversion Excel. And what you find is this. Because that's what I found. You have dozens or hundreds of apps that do a simple conversion between a PDF and an Excel. And that's what people use in the company. Now, you go and look into one of these, like I did, and what happens is you see the instructions. Upload a PDF file and download your converter spreadsheet. Simple. So that's what happened. You start thinking, this is really catastrophic, because when you read upload a PDF file, the question is, upload where? Where does it go? Who's getting these files? Who's getting this data? And then download, well, when you download something, it's a recipe for disaster anyway, because you don't know where you download from, what you download, what else can be in that download besides the spreadsheet. But the reality is that that data has been sent somewhere to be converted into a spreadsheet. And so this is the whole problem. And then you have a bit of a flash, and you remember that at some point there was a study by a company, and this company was making this kind of investigation, basically. So here we are talking of applications in the cloud, those PDF conversion files. Apps in the cloud. Now, in an organization, there are lots of apps that run in the cloud today. You have all the procurement, all the HR apps, all the payroll, expense management, et cetera, et cetera. And so the study was made to ask questions to the IT department of enterprise companies. And the question was, how many apps do you run in your shop, in your company, in your environment? I'll let you think of a number. Imagine what number you can think of. And now I'll tell you the result. On average, in an enterprise environment, about 40 apps were run in an IT shop. Then a scan was made with specific technology that will scan all your environment and see what apps actually run in your enterprise. So I'm going to let you think of a number again. How many apps do you think how many apps will be in that result? I'll go with a number, and that is 1,200 on average. What does that mean? It means that the IT department is completely unaware, on average, of about more than 1,000 apps that run in the environment of the company. Now, the problem is that these apps could do anything. You don't know what they do. In this particular case, in this scenario I'm telling you about, it is a scenario in which people have downloaded those apps or used those apps because they had a productivity issue. So it was a very legitimate problem, very laudable actually. Trying to do my job better. I want to do those calculations. I need an Excel conversion. But obviously, out of those 1,200 minus 40 apps, you could have anything. That's a different chapter, a different problem. Maybe we can have another presentation about that. So this is what really happened. People were using apps in the cloud without the knowledge of the IT. And that is the problem. And that's shadow IT. And the data that are used by those apps are shadow data. Okay, so that's the whole reality. That's the end, the solution of this thriller, of course. So at that point, as you can imagine, all the data that has been uploaded for years probably by maybe 100+ employees of the company have been accumulated somewhere, and someone at some point leaked that data. That's really what happened in this scenario. Okay, so that was Saturday. Now it's Monday. And well, it's a knock-knock moment, isn't it? Guess who? I'll let you think of who could be at the door of the premises. Well, guess what? It's the Data Protection Authority. In this case, I put a picture of the ICO, beautiful jackets that like FBI style. This is, I think, when they stormed the Cambridge Analytica premises a couple of years ago, as you remember. So obviously, given the size of the company, of your company, global company with millions of customers, etc., it is something that a Data Protection Authority will investigate and will probably come to the premises. And so they come there to investigate. And so the investigation begins. And as you walk them to the meeting room in the corridor, they tell you, they say, we're going to look at all the data that have been leaked, and we're going to ask about all your settings and all your measures and so on. And then they mention recital 75 of the GDPR. And I have to tell you, this is to me, this is the core of the GDPR. The GDPR is about risk for the data subjects, and it's about all the data that really have to be protected for all the reasons that you can imagine, that you know. So, and in fact, in this particular case, there was a financial loss because financial data were leaked from customers and employees. Even from the employees, there were trade union memberships. There was performance at work. They are not going to be very happy, these employees. There were obviously some health information. It's an insurance company, millions of records of customers on health, all out on the internet. So that's going to be the core of the investigation. And so as you explain what happened really, so all the PDF conversion into Excel, et cetera, apps in the cloud, unknown to the IT, but used by the employees for productivity reasons, they now have a first assessment. Now, I'm going to go in one slide just a bit deeper in the GDPR. So if you're not a practitioner, a data protection practitioner, you might find this a bit boring. But the point is not about the articles in themselves. It's about the implications. And I'm going to come to the implications in a minute. So the supervisory authority has a few clear ideas at the moment. First of all, they know that you have insufficient control about your data and the way they flow in and out of the company. Obviously, this data has been leaked to some cloud somewhere, who knows. Number two, you don't even know what kind of processes are made by these apps. You know now, but in the first place, you have no idea these processes of conversion were executed by these shadow apps. Which, by the way, brings in the first breach of the GDPR, which is Article 30. You have no idea about records, about the processing activities, so you haven't recorded that. There was no record of that particular process. So Article 30 out of the window. And then you have no idea even of the processors, because whoever is doing this, whoever owns these apps, these are processors who allegedly should act upon instruction by the controller. So you're the controller, you're telling them as a company, convert these files. So there is no processor concept in this case. And so Article 28 to 29 out of the window as well. And then guess what? Well, security of processing, all the other articles, these two, but all the other related articles, also out of the window. There were no measures at all in terms of security. And in fact, 12.7 million records have been leaked. So that's no security whatsoever. Let's see, what else? Transparency, purpose limitation, anything that has to do with Article 5 also has no place in this kind of situation. Shall we talk about data protection by design and by default? I mean, there was obviously no design, there was no default, and clearly the data protection was what it was, 12.7 record leaked. Accountability, you have no idea about what, you had no idea about what's going on. There is no demonstration of your, compliance with anything, especially not with GDPR, so no accountability. And then we can go on, and I had a bit of fun going through the GDPR articles and see which ones could have been impacted in this case. Transparency information, the users, the data subject have no idea about what you're doing with their data. Data subject rights, how could you ever possibly answer a data subject request if you don't even know that this data is going somewhere? And let's not talk about the cross-border international data transfer. Maybe this data goes, these apps are hosted somewhere in some country with no adequacy. Who knows? And then obviously no risk assessment, DPIA on that processing, absolutely not. Forget prior consultation with the supervisory authority. So if you count, we are in front of almost 30 articles. There might be more, I'm sure you might find some more, but almost 30 articles of the GDPR. So 30% of the GDPR you're in breach of 30% of the articles of the GDPR. So that's not a very pretty situation. So that's what the supervisory authority has assessed so far. Now, where are you? Where you're in a darker place than before, because before you saw all this crumbling down. Now you know why. Before you didn't know what you didn't know. Now you know exactly what happened, and you know that you are in a very bad place for many reasons. Let's look at these reasons. And this is the whole point of the presentation. Something that looks like a very, innocent, small IT issue becomes, well, there's a list here. You see all this space I left blank. So, number one, your reputation of the company. Well, you're in the news for the wrong reasons, and that's enough said. Number two, the share price, it's diving, and in fact, investors are abandoning the ship. Who wants to do business with, who wants to invest in a company that has no concept of anything really? I mean, this was really a catastrophic event. Same for all the partners, all your ecosystem, the supplies and so on, bad place. The CEO and the board, well, they are not happy at all. As I said before, they're probably looking for whose fault is it? Who's to blame? And then the internal stakeholders, all the privacy people, the security people, the CIO, the CTO, all the compliance, risk management, etc., they're all in the firing line, of course. Somebody's got to go to prison, not to prison, but figuratively. Customers. Oh, shall we talk about that? Well, there is huge distrust, obviously. 12.7 million records is a lot of records. Will there be a class action? How much is it going to cost? Employees, the mood is obviously very dark. Also, they also feel distrust. They also feel anger. If you're an employee and your data is leaked, including your performance at work, maybe your union, your trade union memberships, and then all the systems, all the IT systems, the processes, the data management, you might need to fix, you might need to purchase new technology, spend a huge amount of money on some consulting companies, change your processes. It's going to be quite a big impact. Personnel will have to be retrained. They will have to be told what to do, what not to do in this case. And then the big one, the one that every company fears when you talk about GDPR, and that is, well, the supervisory authority is very likely to hand out a very monumental fine. Why? Because you are one of the big guys in the market, and if you can punish one to educate everyone else, usually it works. Look at the fines that have been handed out recently to Google and Amazon on cookies. Everybody's looking now at cookies. I mean, they had what, 150 million euros and 75 million euros each from the CNIL. I can tell you, our customers are asking for, some checks about their cookies, and that's obviously the dynamics. The big guys get punished, everyone else will follow. So that was the summary, not a nice one. The company is in a very dark moment, and things might go really bad. But before the supervisory authority people leave the office, one of them turns around and drops a final bombshell. I don't know if you can imagine what I'm about to say, but the final bombshell is in this shape. Article 58. Remember what that is? Obviously, it's powers of the supervisory authorities. And among these powers, you have the corrective powers. And you have A, B, C, D, etc. until F. And F is that the authority can impose a temporary or definitive limitation, including a ban on processing. And that's where you almost pass out, because ban on processing on personal data means the end. Imagine how long can a company of that size, or in reality, any company, last without being able to process personal data? That is the crazy one. So at that point, well, first of all, you will have to explain this to your CEO and the board. We might be banned from processing personal data. That is catastrophic, absolutely. And that's the last image you have. And the last image is pretty much this one. This is a slide. It's a black slide, because that's exactly your mood and your feeling at the moment. It's going to be a very tough few months ahead. Okay, and this concludes the case. Now, let's have some final thoughts and some recommendations. That's what we do as an external DPO, as we are. We recommend. We have we are in a good position to recommend a few things. So recommendations can be the following. First of all, from a technology point of view, the shadow IT is a real danger. I can bet any money that any company will have shadow IT situations in their IT shop. People, that's what people do. They download, that's what we do. We download apps from all over the place into our devices, into our mobile phone, all connected with the company. So there are technologies that can scan your environment to tell you what exactly is running that is unknown to the IT department. You might want to consider also data loss prevention, obviously, technologies. Technologies that will stop critical data that you have identified from leaving the perimeter of the company if unauthorized. Okay, so you can block that data. In this case, it would have blocked the data because it was, data that was critical was going to be sent somewhere. You can use encryption technologies, but you can have any other many other ways from a technology point of view to actually block this kind of situation. Number two, people. Well, people need to be made aware of the risks, obviously. Unsanctioned apps and websites, so unknown to the IT, are a really present risk. Okay, so, and the company should adopt a culture of cybersecurity. We all know this, of compliance and so on. Most importantly, from the top. It is something that has to be cascaded from the top, always. The culture of a company comes from the top all the time. And then processes. In this case specifically, these people were downloading or using these apps in the cloud for very legitimate reasons. They wanted to increase their productivity. They wanted to be less prone to errors. So identify those needs and find the solutions. Buy the licenses of these applications, get some reputable applications, etc. But more importantly, do not leave the IT in the dark. Because if you leave them in the dark, there's no way, they can patch things when things like this happen. And finally, well, in general, accountability. That's one of the key mandates from the GDPR. And the accountability, so always be on top of things and be able to demonstrate your compliance in every field. Let me just give you a few cybersecurity items here, just because obviously this case is a cybersecurity, and then I'll be done. We can then go to the questions if you want. Let me just start with something. In my previous company, we had a huge engine of cyber intelligence, so sensors all over the planet to find malware and everything else. Let me give you some numbers just to give you the magnitude of some of the problems. In 2009, about 2 million new malware variants were found in the internet. Fast forward to 2017, and we were supposedly down to 1.8 million. Slightly better, except that was per day. So that was the amount of malware variants that were in front of security companies and everybody else to be countered, to be patched, and to be found a solution for. So that's the magnitude of the problem. Malware is not the only problem in cybersecurity, obviously, but it's a big one. So in terms of cybersecurity, remember one thing always. Attacks can be very sophisticated, and they are more and more sophisticated in a way. You have huge examples of that. But the vehicle is generally very simple. The vehicle is generally a malicious link. If you send a malicious link to 100 employees of a company, one of them will click on it, or one of them will open an attachment. And so that's how then you spread the malware, and then you get into the meanders of the systems, and then you do whatever you need to do. Social engineering, it's a very simple way. Everybody's on social media. That's a good way to get into company system. Password guessing, or if you have a simple password, they will guess the passwords very simply, or brute force. So try all possible combinations. That's why the recommendation is always to have a very long password, possibly. Although the password is not the final, solution to things, because passwords are kind of fading out as a technology. And then targeted attacks. They will target someone because they know exactly what they can find in someone's environment. Who is one of the most attacked figures in a company? Obviously the CEO. Who else is very much attacked in a company? The CEO PA. Why? Because usually the PA of a CEO has, good credentials to go around, just like the CEO. And so they between the two, they will find a way to get in. Related to that, one of the very fashionable ways to scam companies at the moment is what is called business email compromise. Typical situation, again, on a Friday evening at 11 p.m., the CFO of a company receives an email from the CEO saying, please transfer this huge amount of money to a certain bank account. Otherwise, we will miss the window to buy a certain company or to do anything else. You can say, well, who can be so stupid? Well, let me tell you, 2-3 years ago, the number of these scams in the UK only was about 900 in 1 year. So 900 CEO fell for a fake email from the CFO. So that tells you the story. And then always in terms of apps, in 2017, 17% of Android apps carried malware. At that time, there were about a million Android apps available. So you had 170,000 apps with malware. You can imagine. And then the insiders. In this case of the scenario I mentioned just before, These were insiders, but they were not malicious. Obviously, you have the malicious side of it, so people who know exactly what to leak, how, and where the stuff is and where the good stuff is. Don't underestimate this. Imagine that only probably half of the data breaches is caused by an external malicious actor. Everything else comes from inside. Could be system issues, could be insiders malicious or insiders not malicious. But you know, the inside is a very serious place to consider every time. And that's it. So as I said, this is a disclaimer you have in movies. You know, the characters are fictitious, but it could be a very realistic scenario indeed. So you have this message: shadow IT, unsanctioned apps, it could be a risk.
Thank you, Giampiero.
This is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giampiero. A really, really fascinating and terrifying event there, which I imagine that many of our audience could potentially experience as part of their role. I've got a few questions, if I may. Sure. I was writing down as we went. To what extent do you think that a company can rely on the fact that its employees will have signed a policy document, if they have signed a policy document, you know, an acceptable user policy, for example, acceptable use policy, restricting use of these apps? I guess it depends, but you know, there may be other factors to take into account. But do you see your clients getting these kinds of policies out, and to what extent can they rely on it, do you think? Oh, you're on mute.
That is a very good idea, actually. In my whole career, well, my whole career goes back to many years, but I've never signed anything like that myself. Nobody ever told me, don't download apps. Now, probably they will start doing that because things will start accelerating in that sense. It is something that, you know, when you sign a contract, you will have a number of policies, a number of, you know, non-disclosure, etc., that you have to commit to. And probably this is another good one that probably should be in a contract for employees. Now, how much they can be, you know, linked to this and be compliant to that, that's another matter. As I say, some people download stuff because they need something, or maybe download a game. You know, that's on your you know, you have a mobile, you download a game on a mobile, and by the way, the mobile is connected to your company. So, you know, there you go.
Yeah, definitely worth reminding of the people in the audience today, reminding your employees of the restrictions. I suppose that's one thing that was really, and a number of things came out clearly. You know, the need for the employees to be able to do their job, do an assessment, as you said, of what's needed for their productivity.
Yes, absolutely. So as people work and get on with their work, you will always find new needs, and you will always find new ways, you know, trying to find new ways to get things better. And inevitably, you find solution. This was one case where people had found a solution, which was very effective, actually. It just has a tiny, you know, collateral damage that they haven't considered.
Yeah, in my experience as well, businesses I've worked with have had restrictions on the use of apps like Google Translate. So imagine putting a chunk of a document that's not in your natural language into Google Translate, and then it's either confidential information or highly sensitive. I imagine that that's a similar thing. You know, when you talk about these apps, that's probably one of the apps that you were mentioning.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes I use Google Translate, but not for real important stuff. But yes, it comes quite natural to do so, absolutely.
Yeah. What was also surprising, and we'll go to the questions soon, I imagine that the audience has some, was the fact that so many, the IT team in your scenario uncovered such a high number of apps that weren't approved by the IT team. you know, 1,000 more than they assumed were being used. And I have similar experiences again with businesses that I've worked with. I think there were over 600 apps that were being used in a business where there were only 150 employees, you know, so it's not about the number of employees even, but you'd imagine that proportionally the number of employees means more apps. So it is the responsibility of, I guess, many teams, IT, HR, to understand what is needed within the business and then have a good, very clear approval process. What tips would you give? What are the tips? I know you've made some recommendations. What other practical tips would you give to the audience today around that?
Well, I would say, as I said, the culture of the company is important. You know, I worked with a number of companies. I can tell you the security company I worked for, well, you know, we had a very strict catalog of things to do and not to do. And they also had the ability to verify, to check, to control, to monitor, which, by the way, is not too easy. Because in some countries, you will not be able to check too much on the employee endpoint, for instance. I had a situation in a country where a company with very sensitive data, very special category data, had been fined by the supervisory authority because they had put monitoring on the endpoint of the employees, but for security reasons. But the unions and the, you know, anyone and the data protection authority, no, you can do that because that's a very sensitive thing to do. You're spying on the employee. You cannot spy. Whereas the reason was really for security. Now, the endpoint of an employee is the key, the clear place where the malware will come to. All the malicious link will come through. So if you cannot check that, the reality was that the CISO of the company called me one morning, desperate, said, we can't do security. What can we do? Okay. I'll tell you what, I went to discuss with the data protection authority about this specific topic. And we had, you know, very open conversation. I said, look,
right.
You cannot do security if you don't look at the endpoint. How can you do that? Yes, but, you know, you have to be transparent. Yes, transparency is an important element. So that's key to the whole discussion.
Yeah, so I guess informing the employees is one way to alleviate the concern, I guess, of the supervisory authority. So make sure it's in your workers' privacy notice. Whether that's sufficient under the local law is to be questioned. But I guess there's always this tension between keeping security and then you know, kind of respecting individual employees' rights to privacy.
Totally. Absolutely.
Stuart's arrived. Hi, Stuart.
Hello. Yes, I'm calling today because we've now received some questions. And the first one that came in was from Lena Kusniemi, who's based in Finland. And she said, how can you tackle the issue of free of charge technology, which seems to fly under the radar? Most organizations have rigorous evaluation and acceptance processes where even €1 or dollar is spent, but nothing if there is no money. In other words, if an app is free. So how do you deal with that?
So personally, I'm very, very against whatever is free. Because if it's free, you know the saying, and if something is free, you are the product. So that's the first thing. But in a corporate environment or an organization environment, something that is free is probably not that good anyway, by definition. Okay, so in order to avoid this kind of stuff, because these apps were free, the ones we saw with the PDF conversion, they were free. But were they good? Well, not enough, because everything was leaked. So they were going somewhere where everybody could get a leak. In fact, one thing that could have happened in that case was that instead of leaking all the records, they could have asked for a ransom to the company. You know, they could have said, we have 12 million records, give us so much money, otherwise we leak them in the internet. So that would have been the situation. So anyway, something that is free usually is no good. You know, if it's too good to be good, too good, too nice to be good, to be true, then it's probably isn't. So the point is, back to the question from Lena, I think the point is be very scrutinizing in whatever comes into the environment within the perimeter of the company. This is one way.
Yeah, so in fact, you're saying probably put a ban on free apps. What about that? Or if you want a free app, clear it first through IT before you download an app.
Correct. And in that case, probably IT will say no. And they will say, if you have a need, specific need for your work, then we're going to find something, we're going to select something that is suitable, that is reputable, that we can control, and that doesn't go in some funny country where there's no adequacy, or any kind of other implications.
Okay. Well, there's another question from Jeremy Lewis saying, to what degree can VPN, virtual private networks, permit employees to use cloud services safely?
Oh, that's a bit of a technical question. The cloud safely in the same sentence becomes already something to discuss, because because the cloud is by definition some green space where anything can happen. So yes, you can put filters, you can put virtual VPN and so on, but the reality is let the IT deal with that and make sure they know your need. Don't give them the solution, give them your need, and they will find a solution. That's, to me, is the path. So once you get to the point where, well, will a VPN be a solution? That's already too far away. Tell the IT or the privacy people or the compliance people or the risk management people, what is your problem? And then they will find a way.
Yes, and it may mean some delay. I mean, maybe you could download something today, but it's better to check with IT and get, even if it takes 2 or 3 days to resolve. Yeah. Okay. And there's another question also from Jeremy Lewis to say, how much security can Firefox or Safari secure browsers reduce risks of cloud processing? So they apparently have more secure browsers. I think they have, they claim to. Is really the answer the same as before?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
How much security can Firefox or Safari, that's Apple, secure browsers reduce risks of cloud processing?
I don't know if I don't know if I want to answer the question like this. It's a bit. I would have to go into the specifics of each platform, which I'm not knowledgeable enough, and also I wouldn't comment on a technology, on a particular technology, probably.
Okay, so let's go. There's
Sorry.
another. Yes, there's more. Obviously, more questions we have time for now. So there was another question here from. Yes, so this is from Gerard Chan, Singapore, and he's full of praise for your talk. And then he says he was thinking about constant IT monitoring as one of the ways to try to manage this risk. And this goes back to your answer to an earlier question about what are the ethics or possible potential for IT constantly monitoring what everyone's doing as a way to prevent them downloading apps. So it's more of an ethics question for Helena maybe than a technical IT question.
Yes, absolutely. But as I say, a company is a complex mechanism. Everyone is linked with each other. In this case, you saw something that comes from the customer care team and the HR team and goes all the way to everyone else in a very unwanted way, actually. So IT monitoring will be something that comes from, again, from a culture situation. If in the company you have that kind of culture, then IT knows that they have to monitor, but the employees knows that IT is monitoring, and it's a bit of a virtuous dynamics, actually. So I know I am talking about something very idealistic, probably, but you have to aim for idealism in order to get somewhere. Otherwise you don't go anywhere.
Yes, this is a question for Helena, really, and it's because I'm asking you from your experience. Do you know of any companies where IT or Giampiero as well. I mean, or indeed anyone in the audience, you could type in your answer. And the question is, does anyone know of any company or organization which actually monitors downloading of apps by a particular individual, and so they can sort of catch the moment quickly before it becomes a problem? So to take that risk, and perhaps maybe even checking it with workers' councils in Germany or union representatives.
I can give you my experience, and
Yes,
I'm sure
please.
Giampiero has his views. In my experience, no, there's no active monitoring of downloads. However, there will be IT solutions, information security technology, software, which will do monitoring of the traffic in an organization. So if that will pick up an app, I don't know, I'm not a technologist. However, there are many IT solutions that block certain websites, and I'm sure we've all experienced, trying to get on, I don't know, Gmail even on a work computer, and the organization's decided not to allow Gmail. Each organization will set its own parameters. I think it comes down to really good information security people within the organization, good use of monitoring software that happens to avoid infiltration. But I'm not aware of very active monitoring. I mean, we've seen fines, haven't we, in Germany for the monitoring of staff, although that was in a staff room and that was CCTV, so slightly different. However, the principle, and as Giampiero said, it's a cultural thing. How comfortable is a government, a regulatory authority, a supervisory authority to allow organizations to monitor staff? And that could be an ethical, come from an ethical, cultural viewpoint. It's always this balance. And as Giampiero said, there's always that weighing up. Giampiero, do you have experience of active monitoring of downloads?
Well, I could say, I don't know. I don't know if I've been monitored in my previous job. Because that's the whole point. The point is, you also have a geographical kind of discrimination, in the sense, in the US, for instance, I think it's a lot more simple to actually monitor employees. On the other end of the spectrum, you have countries in Europe. You mentioned Germany. I can tell you Italy or France or Spain, where that is absolutely out of question. So you have to have very serious reasons to monitor employees in that sense. So, and that's why I was mentioning before the case of this customer that called me desperately. I can't do security. I can't monitor the endpoint of my employees. So you have that kind of, and if you're a global company, then you have to deal with the whole spectrum, and that's difficult, because if you do some monitoring in the US, then you cannot do the same monitoring in Germany. And so how do you, and if your employee, if a German employee goes to your office in the US, then are you starting monitoring the employee when he's in the US? That is, that could be a bit of controversy, actually.
Yeah, I think all of this for me leads to so my aim as a lawyer, data protection officer, is to know that I can be contacted, and it's all very transparent. The employees, in my organization know what's expected of them. We regularly have conversations about what they need, about what they can expect, the fact that they can trust the organization, the fact that the organization can trust them, knowing the parameters, and as you said, Giampiero, understanding the requirements, the technological requirements that they have to do their job. That requires a good procurement function, a good people who do vendor management to understand what the vendors are doing, those that are approved by IT and the organization, because it's only then we can understand what the risks are and that we manage those risks clearly. But yeah, this is a constant ongoing conversation, I think, between the board, between the employees, between the data protection teams, between risk, between IT. There's a whole bunch of stakeholders involved. My advice would be to communicate really clearly with the employees, understand their needs, and raise awareness to them as to, make sure they are aware of the risks and what will happen if they do download. And equally, you talked about delays. Things do take time, and that often in an organization is the reason why people download unapproved apps, because they need something immediately. They've recognized that their client is going to leave or they're going to miss a deadline. So it's almost enabling the employees to preempt their needs and getting people to think at an early stage what technology they need. We all rely on tech now, legal tech's massive. So, and there will be a solution somewhere in the organization, you would hope. So yeah, there's a number of things, I think. I don't know if you agree, Giampiero, got anything to add?
No, absolutely. I think you mentioned everything. And actually, as you were mentioning all the different figures in the company, I would like to add the DPO, because the DPO yes. should be in a independent position, whether it's an internal DPO, and we know that some internal DPOs do another couple of jobs on the side, or maybe the DPO is a side job, or if it's an external one, like we are. But the DPO is in a position where, it's an independent kind of entity. And that can give an advice which is different from the CIO or the CTO or the CISO, who are obviously very much into the dynamics of the company. So I think that, think about the DPO advice, because that could be an interesting way to maybe extricate the situation.
Yeah, I'm sure the audience will be able to come and chat to you if they have any questions about appointing an external DPO. Stuart, do we have any other questions?
Yes, one was about trends, and someone's asking, do scans, when an IT department does scans to find all these apps, is it the usual pattern? There's a few individuals who download lots of apps, or is the trend across the organization normally?
No, I don't have specific information about that kind of trend, but yes, it could be possible that some individual will have more activity, let's say, for whatever reason. But also, don't forget another important element. I mentioned the insider, but consider also those who, the contractors, for instance, those who are on the edge. They have access to your systems, but they are not employees. And by the way, they have their own equipment. So, bring your own device, which is also something that the employees can do. But that adds more complexity to the situation anyway, because you don't know what that external entity will bring to the perimeter of the company. So that's another element always to consider. Maybe there are some people who, being external, they have other jobs and they download other stuff for other reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my last point is not a question, but it's to say that the slides, somebody's asked, will the slides be available? And yes, after the session, we will inform all the participants.
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much, Giampiero, for making it available. So, back to you, Helen.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. And I think it just remains for me to thank Giampiero very much for an extremely interesting and engaging presentation. So I think in conclusion, we need to make our people aware of the risks of shadow IT, downloading apps, check our contracts and policies with our employees and consultants and make sure that the restrictions are included, look at IT solutions, balance the rights of individuals with an IT monitoring, and know what's going on in your organization. So thank you very much for your attention, everyone, today. Thank you again to Giampiero.
Thank you as well. Thank you, Privacy Laws and Business, and everybody. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Just a reminder for those still watching that we have 3 more webinars coming up on the 13th of April, that's a Tuesday, how to keep personal data flowing freely between UK, Jersey Guernsey and the Isle of Man. That's at 2 p.m. UK time. The next webinar on the 22nd of April is around South Africa and Mauritius, where I plan to go on my holidays soon. And on the 18th and 20th of May, we are looking at new and updated privacy laws in Asia. So please do join us. And obviously take a look at the privacylaws.com website for all the information on our upcoming conference as well. So thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Giampiero. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Giampiero. Thank you.
Bye.